Welcome, everybody. It's the 4 o'clock hour here at Business Monday at GoLocal Live. I want to thank Jeff Grabowski, the outgoing CEO of Ørsted USA and the former CEO of Deepwater Wind, the man really responsible for putting the first offshore wind project in the United States. So it was great to see him. Gary Sasse, the money man, is here. Cha-ching. Jeff Grabowski was a good investment. Did you have any action in that deal?
I wish I did.
Yeah, no, it was pretty good, right?
Yeah.
A blistering week of news, considering we're in the hot days of July. Lots of Providence schools. Let's start with Providence schools for a few minutes. Mm-hmm. The state has officially taken it over. I think everybody who was paying any attention knew that that was coming since the third week of April, that was a foregone conclusion. Saul Kaplan from Business Innovation Factory had the insight tweet of saying, what is taking so long? You know, if they can come back for a special session for a contract for lotteries that are 3 or 4 years out, why aren't we coming back to get these things going like this? What could be a bigger priority than the failed Providence school system?
No, it's hard to explain, why it's taken this long, especially since there was a long glide path to get to this point. Having said that, you only have one commissioner at a time. It's easy to sit back and criticize and second guess. I don't think it does any good right now. I would hope, though, that the legislature will get involved at some point. I think the Speaker and the Senate President, should appoint an oversight committee to monitor what's happening, to raise questions when questions need to be raised, and to keep the process as transparent as possible. But at this point, you have to be patient because the person who's been given responsibility feels that she needs some time to put the specific plan in place.
The Speaker was here last week on an interview with Kate Nagel, and he said, hey, listen, don't be coming looking to the General Assembly to bail out the physical infrastructure of the failed Providence School Department. We've given them their money. They've misspent it. They've failed to do maintenance for decades. And it's not the state's responsibility. It's the city of Providence's responsibility. Well, I'm not quoting directly, but that was certainly the message.
Well, the state's ultimate school board is the General Assembly. We've known that. And it's fine to say, but if you look at measurements of debt, there was a report that came out recently from the Public Finance Management Board, and it looked at municipal debt, and it looked at net municipal debt as a percentage of assessed value. The target is to keep it under 3%.
Right.
Providence was at 3.7%. Woonsocket was higher, but no other community had that problem. Looking at the overall debt of government debt service plus the ARC contribution to pensions and the payments to OPED, there were 4 communities that were above the targeted amount. Providence is one of those targets. So to say that Providence can assume more debt flies in the face of what the debt burden is right now. In the Speaker's defense, though, the public approved 2 years ago was a $250 million
last November.
The $250 million bond issue, and I think within that amount approved by the voters, there should be sufficient revenue to help Providence meet its most serious problems.
So Providence has got, if you go back to that 17 Blue Ribbon Commission that looked at what the condition of this state school buildings are, that there's easily $2 billion that need immediate help statewide, and there's about $4 billion in the foreseeable long-term, short-term. We're still only sort of sticking fingers in the dike.
Yeah, but there's also an affordability question. Can you imagine the impact on local taxpayers, particularly in Providence, of assuming $2 billion in more debt?
Right.
It may be needed, but this is going to have to be managed.
So, what keeps the energy going? You can almost already a little bit feel the lull. Not much narrative from the governor's office. The community meetings are over. There's been no change to the Board of Education. We talked about this last week. That it's the same group that saw these test results year in, year out, there seems to be a little bit of, okay, we'll get there. 2 more weeks till we have an agreement with Providence. Then it's a 90-day transition period. We'll be looking at this. Nothing's been done of any substance in Providence schools to any significance to the infrastructure of these schools. There's been nothing relative to teacher training. There's been nothing relating to safety.
Well, and that's the issue. There's the perception and there's the reality. So I assume, excuse me, this is,
I'm not going to say who that is, but let me just tell you that's a person of national importance
that is.
came in on that phone call.
But so there's perception and the reality. So what's happening behind the scenes and the work being done, I have to assume that there is work being done, but also in addressing a public problem, there has to be a perception of urgency to keep public support. And that it's required that the elected leadership do that. And so I think the governor should be out there as much as she can, stressing the sense of urgency, because we've identified the problem, but that's all we've done is identify the problem.
Well, you say working behind the scenes. Isn't this the period of time that we can stop working behind the scenes and maybe pull up the shade and start working in front of folks? You've just announced that the school system in Providence is the worst in the country. You also look at the test results of other communities in Rhode Island, and you say they're not much different. The other urban corridor cities and towns are really in the same position.
But they spend a lot less money than Providence does.
And they spend a lot less money to get those equally bad results. You don't have to spend a lot to get bad results, some of those communities have shown. And you now got some level of engagement from parents. Thousands, I would guess, certainly more than 1,000 came out to those community meetings. Listen, if I'm a parent and I show up on September 3rd, they're going to have nice flowers planted in front. But when you go in that building, it's the same building. It's the same faculty. It's the same security. It's the same everything else. Even if you can't fix it fast enough, don't you need to show them that you're trying to fix it?
You have to show them you're trying, and it's also incumbent upon the parents to create a kind of educational tea party. You remember the Tea Party in, was it 2009, 10?
Yeah.
Where a politician, elected official, could not go to a meeting, without active participation. So it's on both sides that you need active participation. You need a kind of tea party mentality on the part of parents because their kids are really being hurt by the current system. I would like to see more urgency. I'd like to see a much more transparent public process. But you have one leader at a time, and the old saying is, lead, follow, or get out of the way. So I think there are 2 levels here. I think one is professional level as to what RIDE can do and how RIDE has to cross all the T's and dot all the I's to get it done. And the other is the political level, the political leadership level of keeping the issue before the folks, driving a sense of urgency, putting pressure on the bureaucrats to move it forward. We're all very impatient, but this problem was something that we've known about for a number of years, but I can't explain, why it's not moving quicker, but I do have confidence in the commissioner.
Do you think she has enough support? I mean, you heard the speaker right here come in and say, I'm not giving up any more money.
Well, I think the first thing she has to do is put in place an infrastructure, an organizational infrastructure. And she has to make the case. There's been nothing done to make the case for additional resources. But, we know additional resources are needed. We underfund bilingual education. Most of the kids in the school are bilingual kids. That affects the test scores. We know what some of the facility problems are. But before additional money is put in, you have to establish the goodwill that you're actually going to fix the problem. No sense throwing money at a problem that people are not confident you're going to fix. The issue right now, as you've pointed out, seems to be frustration that things are not moving quicker. Hopefully that'll be corrected.
Let's jump over to leadership of education in the state of Rhode Island. We had a story last week that the chair of the Board of Education, the highest appointed person, hadn't, other than a press event, had not visited a Providence public school. You know, the Journal followed up the next day or the day after, really raising the question if there should be wholesale change, both in the Providence School Committee and at the state's Board of Education. Um, is it time for some fresh leadership? You've made the point that a mid-level executive does not have the gravitas to be able to show that this is of critical importance. Is it time that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I look at the Providence School Committee, and they have a lot of reasons that things weren't done better, but clearly no one would suggest that they were strong advocates for these kids, and I think it's time for them to move and get out of the way. I think at the state level, this has been a problem, or an issue, not a problem, for some time, is the business community put up money and paid for the Johns Hopkins study. And the easiest thing some of these large businesses can do is write a check, but that's not enough. They have to be willing to step forward. Somebody on the Partnership for Rhode Island needs to step forward and chair the group and be a leader, get peer support. And that would bolster the professionals that ride. It would give the governor an ally in this, because there's going to be a lot of issues that are raised. This is not going to be a clear path to victory. There are going to be obstacles that are put up, and you're going to need the strongest team possible with gravitas and leadership skills to overcome some of those obstacles.
Two of the leading companies in Rhode Island are battling over potential lottery business, IGT and Twin River. Should whoever CEO agrees to chair the Board of Education for the state of Rhode Island get the contract?
Only the winner.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I think there's a more basic issue. When the original 20-year agreement was reached in 2003, the world was very different. Mm-hmm. We had 3Gs, no cloud, landlines. GTEC was a wholly owned local company. They were threatening to leave the state. A 20-year agreement was reached, but they also agreed to build a $65 million facility. 20 years later, 17 years later, the world has changed. And to suggest that we should have 40 years, think about this, 40 years where technology changes every year, you have no bid contracts in a highly technological business is lunacy. It's crazy. And so the issue, should be putting forth an open public RFP, bid process. Let Twin River bid, let IGT bid, and whoever else internationally that wants to bid, and then do an evaluation. I get a kick out of all these studies that are being paid for by either IGT or somebody else. Say, well, show the economic benefit of 1,000 jobs. Well, yeah, of course. If you create 1,000 jobs, there's going to be economic benefit. Whether it's working in a bank or at IGT or in a
But
factory.
the actual operation of the state system here in Rhode Island is about 50 or 60 jobs. They've kept those other jobs here as a part of that agreement 20 years ago.
And that was, and both sides have said they would keep 1,000 jobs here. So you need to, when you do a cost benefit, you need to have an option. It's pretty useless to do a cost benefit study of one option.
Is the mistake that the governor just bungled this process? I mean, why would you ever put in at the end of a legislative session? By the way, at the end of a legislative session in which you're at thermonuclear war with the Speaker of the House, why wouldn't you wait for the following January to
Not
begin
only
the
that,
process?
I think there's a more fundamental bungling of this issue. The contract doesn't come up till 2023. Mm-hmm. There was plenty of time to do due diligence and put an open, transparent process in place. We weren't up against a wall that said we have 6 months to enter into a contract and get this issue resolved. We actually have 2 or 3 years to get it resolved. And so there should have been an orderly process over the next 18 to 24 months to get the issue resolved. And coming in at the last minute, the optics of that were terrible. But just the fact that they came in with a proposal wouldn't make much difference if they had come in at the beginning of the session or they came in this fall. There was no reason why this needed to be rushed. There was no reason why there wasn't a proper due diligence, transparent, open bidding, things that are kind of basic to good government. And so the state gets a black eye, whether it's true or not, when it appears that the governor is going forward because of a political consideration. I don't know if that's the, but it looks that way, and it certainly doesn't make it easy to do business in the state.
Process should be slowed down, should get a third-party expert to do some analysis. Certainly on one part is this rush. The second part is, Twin River has new ownership. It has a big hedge fund behind it. It has a new, I don't know, he's not the CEO, but a new leader within the state who's very, very aggressive. But they don't run lotteries anywhere. They run casinos, small casinos.
Well, we could go back and forth on who has the capacity, who doesn't have the capacity. The only way you find that out is you have, like I was repeating myself, an open bidding process. You get the bids, you bring in independent third-party experts to review those bids, and you'll know pretty quickly as to whether the people that or the responsible bids, whether the people have the capacity. But we get into this kind of political chessboard game. This guy has capacity, this guy doesn't, they've done it before, they haven't. I'd like to just have a fresh slate. The IGT or GTEC had a 20-year contract. Certainly that should honor that contract, but there have been amendments to the contract which have benefited the company over this period of time. But they should complete their contract 2 years before the contract is completed. We should start a process that I've described and get the facts and make a decision. We're speculating, and we've made the problem more political, and when it becomes this political, you make a bad decision.
Let's jump over to, is this a result of the dysfunction right now between the executive branch and the legislative branches?
Not necessarily. It becomes, it appears that way when you make boneheaded moves on how you proceed. But there might have been tension. But if the administration had proceeded to put together an RFP to open up the process to have bids and an open contract, there might have been differences in interpreting those contracts. There might have been differences political between the executive and legislative branches. But at least there would have been an orderly process. So we have created a process that no one can justify as orderly rather. We've created a process that's being sped up for no apparent reason. This contract's not until 2023. We do not have to renew that contract in 2019. There is no reason that has to be done. The lottery is going to function. The machines are going to operate. The vendors are going to do what's required of them. We have a strong staff at the lottery that'll oversee this. And go from there.
Now I'm going to hit you at home. I saw Alan Hassan on this. And I do remember good government Alan Hassenfeld when needing some state support in the middle of the night when Mattel was trying to take over Hasbro about 15 years ago, had the legislature break every single possible rule to pass legislation in 24 hours. No scheduled committee hearings, no rules about how long it had to be reviewed, no rules. So Alan, who is a distant cousin of mine, just for the record, I want to give full disclosure, he is a distant relative of mine. My father, actually, when he was a young man, worked painting Mr. Potato Head's eyes over at Hasbro, did seem to be able to work the process pretty darn good when it was in Hasbro's best interest.
I would, certainly a company should watch out for the best interest of the company and their shareholders, but there's a quantum difference between getting support from the legislature.
What was that called, a poison pill?
Yeah, but there's a quantum difference in getting support from the legislature to protect a locally owned company from being taken over from the outside, as opposed to the state doing $1 billion worth of business and doing it on a most favored friend basis.
Yeah, I remember it as Good Bill, I Move Passage.
Well, but
I think that was back in the days when lobbyists could go on the floor too. So it was all. Was that about 20 years ago?
Well, that was I chaired a Blue Ribbon Commission that recommended lobbyists not go on the floor, and I still have a lot of friends that have thanked me for that.
Let's talk about the state of the state. If the governor was giving the state of the state address right now, what would she say?
Well, that's
What should she say?
what should she say is, I'm trying to put it in context because, she would brag about economic, growth, and yet we know that while there's been growth here, our economic development has lagged the national average in most categories, most factors. It's lagged our friends in Massachusetts. So I think what she should say is that we've had growth. The growth is stabilized the situation the best it could, hasn't kept up with the national average, and now we have to reinvent what we've done. We've had a program in place at Commerce, Rhode Island, and other parts of the state. Needs to be revised, updated, and changed. I would talk about the kinds of changes I would make. I would talk about preparing the state's economy for data analytics and the things that are going to be relevant, going forward. I would talk about that's the principal thing. I would talk about that we've recognized the problems in our urban schools and we're trying to address them. But what is interesting? So after 5 years in office, we're now at the point of beginning to do things that you would have thought it would have started much sooner in the first term. And the governor has some real challenges. There have been failures, and people don't forget these failures. They may not be on the front page of the paper anymore, but the UHIP problem, the DCYF problem, the education, problem, those are failures. Economic developments, the result has been mixed, and we have to reunite the public concern and interest in moving next foot forward. The way we've done politics, it's supposed to be clean government, the way the perception of politics on the IGT thing that we've talked about, whether it's true or not, there's certainly a perception of what's happened. And then the budget problems. After 4 years, same structural deficit. So I think she really has to say that we've made progress, we hadn't made enough progress, and we have to move forward in additional directions, but I'm glad I don't have to write that speech.
We had a story last week. It's been an issue we've been covering pretty aggressively over the last 5 years, which is the Wexford Innovation Center. That project opened a couple weeks ago. When you peel back the onion a little bit, the net new jobs failed to meet what the low expectation were. 85 jobs moved over from another Brown building. Most of the space that Brown is taking now has been disclosed that it's going to be classrooms. Second of all, Johnson & Johnson, who is supposed to be one of the key focal points of that innovation center, he's not taking a full floor at 25,000 square feet, but has cut back to just 10,000 square feet, and that the jobs that they were supposed to have at 75 in 2017 is now only 63 or so.
Yeah, did I say that? It's interesting. One of the things that's taught in Finance 101 is when you use tax incentives to create jobs, you really need to know how much you're spending per job. So do the math on how much we've given Johnson & Johnson
Yeah.
and see what it's cost us to create these jobs.
Yeah, on that project, because there was a $1 million expenditure up at 1 Ship Street, which did take place, you're looking at about $81,000 per job if they had hit the 75. They're off by about 25%, so I guess it's about
$100,000.
Yeah, one way or the other,
Yeah.
or a little less. The only new net jobs to Rhode Island is 2 of the floors are being taken by Cambridge Innovation Center, which are a WeWork-like work environment in which startups can come and rent chairs and use the internet and things like that. That, accordingly, is 12 full-time positions. That seems high, but we'll go with the 12 full-time positions. That's a big bet. It's an $88 million project. There's about $40 million plus in state and local incentives and actual dollars. Do you have to do that? Do you have to build it and hope they come to spark 195?
Philosophically, I've always had, issues, and we've discussed before, with crony capitalism, using tax incentives. There's certain things that you take risks on. I much prefer to take a risk on a Wexford type facility than all the hotels and the apartment houses that we're building. So the bet is the CIC part, will be filled. There we will attract high tech and then 21st century kinds of projects. And we'll see. Right now it's not apparent where and how they'll come, but that's what the bet is. It's much better to be building that type of facility in the I-195 area, which at one time we called the Innovation District. We don't call it that anymore. And then some of the other projects. But you would need a crystal ball to predict it's going to work. And I think they have really a lot of obstacles to climb before this is successful.
How do we, it's really a we statement, how do we foster that? Because there is some significant potential, right?
Yeah.
There is the potential of finally we'll have a first-class place to incubate emerging businesses. And they'll have the infrastructure, they'll have a network of experts from CIC who's been wildly successful in Cambridge. I mean, that's as successful an incubation project as there is in the world. It's the crashing together of Harvard and MIT and 100 venture and private equity firms.
And that's what you don't know, because Cambridge is a unique place internationally.
Right.
Brown's fine university. It's not MIT.
Right.
Harvard is a fine university. Brown is not Harvard, though it's a great place. And so the question is, do we do things at the right scale? Do we have the infrastructure in place to make this work? Or are we following a dream, based on what others did without a realistic assessment of what capacity we had? I don't know the answer to that question. And I think we've made the investment, and now everyone needs to pull together to try and make it work. But it's by no means certain.
Does it need a broader reach? Should Bryant be involved? Should RISD be involved? Should the University of Rhode Island be involved there? And can we ever become a place, we've got to be one of the only states, I mean, I'm not sure about South Dakota, North Dakota, that doesn't have any real venture going on in the state. There's no VCs really working the state.
Well, before you bring in other universities, they have to figure out whether it's worth the candle for them to invest money in that facility. And I haven't seen anything to suggest that there would be a return on investment from some of these other institutions. I don't know what the specifics are, what the niche is, but they have to make the business case for it. It's not a question of, we'll get all the universities together. But there has to be a business reason to do that. Now, there was a business reason with the nursing school,
right,
where URI and RIC came together. With the hospital district up there, that made business sense. Somebody who is leading economic development has to make the same case and the same business sense to market this facility. A lot of it's marketing, and right now I'm not sure what their marketing plan is.
We've talked a little bit about where the state's economy is. Murmurs coming out of Washington that the Fed is going to cut rates. We have very low unemployment. We have a high-performing stock market. The S&P, I believe, is at a record level. Why cut rates now?
That's a good question, because the president wants to stimulate economic growth for the election. And the more serious reason is if you look at the world economy, you're starting to see some signs of slowing down. And in cutting rates, the experience hasn't been that cutting rates has caused more inflation. So you look at both sides of the equation. If inflation is staying intact, there may be some room to cut rates. I think what's obscene about this process is the overt pressure that this president is putting on the Fed. The Fed was supposed to be, independent, and it's never been told.
Is that the Fed's problem, though, not the president's? I mean, listen, the president's heavy-handed in everything he does. There's no secret on that. But isn't it the Fed's job to stay independent? I mean, and if they don't think that the rate should be cut, then the rate shouldn't be cut.
That is their job, to stay independent. But the way and administrations have always exerted pressure on the Fed, but there are ways to exert the pressure, and there are ways not to do it. If we didn't have an independent Fed, just think what Paulson and Beneke worked together to help us get out of the TARF and things now that we found out work. TARF was probably one of the most successful programs that we had. Well, so administrations and the Fed work together when there's an issue to work together on. But, but at the same time, if the markets get the impression that the Fed is just being pushed around by a president by threatening the chairman, et cetera, that's very short-sighted.
Not that he would ever do that.
Oh, gosh, he knows what he would do. I'm not sure he knows until he wakes up in the morning what he's going to do.
Tuesday, last topic. Tuesday and Wednesday are Democratic debate nights. Will we see them move ever more to the left, further alienating more Americans, or will we see some sign of the Democratic Party putting forth some ideas that most Americans can gravitate to?
Well, the adults in the room would try to recognize that the objective is to make sure Donald Trump doesn't serve a second term. And so if that's your primary objective, then that should govern what you do. But it seems to be the case that the Democratic primary has gotten down to 4 candidates, Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Biden. And you look at the polling data, and there's not much movement, beyond that. Buttigieg is what, 5 or 6%,
Yeah.
but those 4 are the only people in double digits. So I think it's going to, move in that direction. And I think when some of the others drop out, there's some really more moderate candidates, Klobuchar, the governor of Montana, and a few others. I think they'll begin to, coalesce. The quickest way to keep Trump in office is to take away private medical health insurance. And so I think they'll figure that out. They need Nancy Pelosi and others, leadership of the party, will work on that.
Do you see any predictions for Tuesday, Wednesday?
No,
Does Biden look better than he did last Democratic debate?
he can't look any worse, can he?
He cannot look any worse.
Yeah.
My joke the following morning was Kamala Harris was arrested. You say, for what? Elder abuse. Beating up Joe Biden so badly. Does he come back a little stronger, a little feistier, a little more assertive?
I think he'll be more prepared. I think it's interesting, though. So he has this very bad debate, and his numbers suffer. But now they're back to where they were before the debate. And so that tells me that within the Democratic Party, there's a strong element that recognizes that you need a candidate who has the best possible chance of winning.
Yeah, I mean, my only problem with that is if you look at 08 and you look at 16, who was leading at this timing had no correlation to who ended up being nominees and presidents.
Well, but in 16, it was a closed book, wasn't it? It was just Hillary. There was no other.
No, I mean on the Republican side, obviously. Where the contested race
I was through that twice. 2 different candidates. Yeah. No, and what happened with that is Trump identified the change that it took place in the base of the party. The others hadn't gotten there that quick. I'm reading a great book right now by Tim Alberta, American Carnage, and anyone that's interested in that should read that book because he really details what happened.
With that, Mr. Moneyman, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We've got a beat on just about everything. Will guide us accordingly. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Tomorrow afternoon, Kate Nagel is back. I do not know if the one and only political science expert Jennifer Lawless will be tuning in from Washington, but she's always got insights. And also want to thank Jeff Grabowski for coming in today with a little recap of how Deepwater became Deepwater and what it means to Rhode Island's economy and energy independence over the next decade and more. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you back tomorrow.